When did a teacher's own rules come back to destroy them? Mrs. Finch had the strictest bathroom policy in the entire school. 0 passes during her exam blocks, no exceptions. One girl even brought a note from her urologist about her chronic UTI, and Mrs. Finch threw it in the trash. It didn't affect me much since I always tracked my period religiously, but I watched it destroy my classmates. Ellie stuffed paper towels in her underwear before every class, praying they'd last 2 hours. Students begged for changes. Girls presented statistics about irregular cycles and heavy flow days. Parents complained at PTA meetings. Mrs. Finch's response never changed. In my 20 years of teaching, girls have always managed. You know your cycle. Plan accordingly. This builds responsibility. After Amy's accident junior year, blood running down her leg while she sobbed through calculations, something shifted. The network started. We weren't just protecting dignity anymore. Jane had endometriosis so severe she'd fainted twice at home. One more incident and her Princeton scholarship was gone. Girls who'd never spoken started leaving supplies in each other's lockers. Maddie used her popularity to create distractions whenever Jane went pale, but Finch was getting suspicious, watching us closer each day. We all knew it was only a matter of time before someone slipped up. Touching your stomach meant emergency incoming. Adjusting a hair tie meant I have supplies. And for months everything was okay, until the contraband investigation. Someone reported suspicious exchanges between female students. Mrs. Finch went full detective mode, searching bags, checking lockers. She got close, so close, to finding the mother lode, a hollowed-out textbook containing 50+ overnight pads hidden in the supply closet. Maddie saved us with Oscar-worthy performance anxiety about the upcoming exam, complete with hyperventilation. Then came the AP exam in May. But this wasn't just any exam. Principal Williams sat in the back with his evaluation clipboard, observing Mrs. Finch for her department head application. She'd bragged in the faculty newsletter about her exceptional classroom discipline and zero disruption testing environment. Mrs. Finch strutted around wearing her best white pencil skirt, the one she saved for important occasions. Bathrooms are for before and after. Once we begin, that door stays shut. No exceptions. You've had all year to practice proper planning. We're showing Principal Williams how real discipline creates success. The test started fine. Mrs. Finch performed for the principal, pacing with perfect posture, making notes on her clipboard. About an hour in, I caught Raven's eyes widening at Mrs. Finch. She touched her stomach in the way only a girl could understand. By hour 2, every girl in the room was on high alert. Mrs. Finch had stopped her performance pacing. She stood behind her podium, gripping the edges, trying to look professional while her body betrayed her. Then Maddie saw it first. The dark spot on the white skirt, the worst possible color for the worst possible day. In front of the principal, in front of cameras. The entire female population held its breath. The stain was spreading. Principal Williams was writing notes. She was maybe minutes from career suicide. Viral video infamy. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. I didn't think. I just reached into my backpack, grabbed one of the overnight pads, the huge ones, practically diapers, and my emergency black cardigan. Every girl in the room shifted slightly, creating a visual barrier as I walked to her desk. Maddie loudly asked the principal about college recommendations. Raven accidentally knocked over her water bottle. Katie started a coughing fit. I leaned close and whispered, I have extras, and this cardigan is long enough to cover. Her eyes filled with tears of humiliation and desperation. She grabbed both items and speed walked to the supply closet. The door clicked shut. The sisterhood mobilized. Ellie asked Principal Williams about the sports program. 3 girls surrounded the news camera asking about student perspectives. We held the chaos for 10 minutes. When Finch emerged, the black cardigan tied around her waist hung to her knees. She caught my eye and mouthed, thank you, then looked around the room, realizing every single girl had participated in saving her. After everyone filed out, she asked me to stay. Principal Williams congratulated her on excellent classroom management and left. I didn't even respond before walking out. She didn't know it at the time, but we hated her guts. And now we had her exactly where we needed her to ruin her life. I pushed through the classroom door and headed straight for the second-floor bathroom where we always met after big stuff happened. My hands were still shaking from what we'd just pulled off. The door swung open and Maddie, Raven, Katie, and Ellie were already there, faces red and breathing hard like they'd run a race. Jane sat on the counter by the sinks, her skin pale and hands gripping the edge so tight her knuckles went white. We all stood there for a second just looking at each other. Then Maddie started talking fast about how she'd gotten Principal Williams to look at her college stuff while I was at Mrs. Finch's desk. She kept moving her hands around, showing how Raven knocked her water bottle over at just the right time to make noise and mess. Katie jumped in about her fake coughing fit and how she'd kept going until her throat actually hurt. Everyone had done their part perfect, like we'd practiced it 100 times even though we hadn't. Jane finally spoke up real quiet about how this was bigger than just today. She reminded us about Amy crying in the hallway last year with blood on her legs and how she still wouldn't wear light colors to the school. Jane's Princeton scholarship was hanging by a thread because if she had one more medical emergency in class, they'd mark her as unreliable. Mrs. Finch had been doing this for 20 years, making girls suffer and calling it responsibility. Now we finally had something on her, something that could change everything. But then Ellie pointed out the huge problem we hadn't thought about yet. Our phones got collected before the exam started, so nobody had video or pictures of what happened. The evaluation footage belonged to the school, and we'd never get our hands on it. All we had was what we saw with our own eyes, and Mrs. Finch would never admit we helped her. She'd probably say she handled it herself, or that nothing even happened. Maddie got this look in her eyes and said we should tell everyone anyway. Spread it through the whole school about how Mrs. Finch had an accident and needed our help. She wanted to post about it online and make sure everyone knew the woman who wouldn't let girls use the bathroom couldn't control her own body. But I saw it different and told them we could use this to get the policy changed instead of just getting revenge. The group split right down the middle with some wanting to destroy her and others wanting to fix the actual problem. We stayed in that bathroom arguing until the late buses started loading and we had to leave before someone came looking. That night I sat at my desk desk with a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember from the past 2 years. Amy's accident came first with a date, and how Mrs. Finch made her sit there for another 40 minutes while she bled through her jeans. Then Jane fainting in the hallway after holding it too long because she was scared to ask. Ellie stuffing paper towels in her underwear every single day, and the rash she got from the rough paper. Each story I wrote made the pattern clearer and uglier. 20 years of girls going through this and nobody doing anything real about it. The next morning brought a problem none of us saw coming when we realized how many seniors still needed Mrs. Finch to write their college recommendation letters. If we moved against her now, she could tank anyone's chances with a bad letter or just refuse to write them at all. The deadline for most schools was only a few weeks away, so there wasn't time to get new teachers on board. This made everything way more complicated than just wanting to see her suffer. I pulled out my phone during lunch and texted Jane that whatever we decided, keeping her scholarship safe came first. She sent back a heart emoji, but I could feel how scared she was through the screen. She'd been walking this tightrope all year, trying to stay in class through the pain so she wouldn't lose her shot at Princeton. Mrs. Finch knew about her condition and still wouldn't bend the rules even a little bit. Then Mrs. Finch sent out her usual morning email to all her classes, thanking everyone for their exemplary behavior during the AP exam. She wrote about how proud she was that students showed such discipline and focus during an important evaluation. Not one word about what really happened or how we saved her career. The tone was so dismissive it made my blood boil because she was erasing what we did like it never happened. She was back to her old self already, pretending she was still in total control. During morning announcements, they said Mrs. Finch was one of 3 finalists for the department head position, and the decision would come before the school year ended. That meant we had maybe 2 weeks to figure out what to do before she got even more power over students. If she became department head, she could make her bathroom policy standard for the whole math department or even push it school-wide. The thought of more girls going through what we went through made me sick to my stomach. At lunch, I grabbed a napkin and started drawing 2 columns while everyone crowded around our usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. The left column said formal complaint, and the right said social pressure, and I wrote pros and cons under each while the girls argued over French fries and chocolate milk. Something doesn't add up about Mrs. Finch thanking everyone for exemplary behavior in that email. Does she really think nobody noticed what happened, or is she testing to see who might talk? Maddie kept stabbing her fork into her salad, saying we should destroy her now while we had the chance. But Jane looked ready to throw up at the thought of any confrontation that might risk her scholarship. We took a vote by passing my phone around with a simple poll app, and the formal route won 7-4, though Maddie rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might fall out. She leaned over and grabbed my napkin, writing cardigan leverage in big letters across the top, saying we could meet with Finch privately and basically blackmail her into changing the policy without going through official channels. The idea made my skin crawl, but I could see some girls nodding because it might actually work without destroying anyone's life or college chances. Everyone looked at me since I was the one who handed her the supplies, and my stomach turned into knots when I heard myself volunteer to approach her first. The next afternoon, I waited until everyone else left her classroom, my hands shaking as I walked up to her desk where she was grading papers with her red pen. I told her we needed to talk about bathroom policies, and mentioned how yesterday's situation could have been avoided with more flexibility during tests. She looked up and thanked me again for my help, her voice all fake sweet, but then said her teaching methods had worked for 20 years, and she wasn't changing them now just because some girls couldn't plan ahead. When I pushed harder and reminded her that we kept her secret when we could have let everyone see, she stood up straight and her whole face changed. She warned me about spreading gossip that could damage reputations, and even though she didn't say it directly, the threat was clear as day. I left her room feeling like I'd been punched in the gut, knowing she still thought she had all the power even after what happened. The next morning, I went to the counseling office and made an appointment with Christine Parsons, telling the secretary it was about a health and safety issue affecting female students. Christine called me in during third period, and I sat in her small office surrounded by motivational posters while I explained everything from Amy's accident to Jane's medical condition to the secret network we'd built. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, nodding and asking questions, and I could see her connecting all the dots about what had been happening in Finch's class. She explained the formal complaint process, how we'd need written statements with specific dates and witnesses, but she also warned that using the cardigan incident as blackmail would backfire legally and could get us in serious trouble instead. She offered to support us through proper channels and help us file everything correctly, which gave us our first real adult on our side who actually had some power in the school. Over the next 2 days, I coordinated with the network to collect written statements from anyone willing to share their experience, setting up meetings in empty classrooms and the library study rooms. Amy agreed to write down everything about her accident from last year, describing how she bled through her jeans while Finch made her sit there for another 40 minutes to finish the test. Ellie documented the daily humiliation of stuffing paper towels in her underwear and the painful rash she got from the rough paper against her skin. Jane's statement was the hardest to read, explaining how she'd fainted twice at home from the pain, but was too scared to miss class because one more absence would cost her the Princeton scholarship. The stack of papers grew thicker with each story, creating a paper trail of systematic harm that went back years. On Thursday morning, Bryce Reed from the school newspaper caught me at my locker, saying he'd heard whispers about something big happening with Mrs. Finch's class, and wanted to know if there was a story there. He offered to write an investigative piece about bathroom policies without naming specific teachers, which would put public pressure on the administration without directly attacking anyone. I told him I'd think about it and get back to him, but I could already see how media attention might be the leverage we actually needed. That Friday, Principal Williams finally agreed to meet with Maddie and me, with Christine present as our advocate, to discuss what he called interim accommodations for bathroom access during testing. His office felt like a tomb with its dark wood furniture and walls covered in diplomas and awards, and the leather chairs squeaked every time we moved. Maddie and I presented our case as professionally as we could, explaining the medical necessity and showing statistics about adolescent health while trying to keep our anger from boiling over. Williams nodded and took notes, but kept checking his watch like we were wasting his time, and when we finished, he said he'd review department policies after AP season ended, which was basically his way of brushing us off with bureaucratic delays. I could feel Maddie's whole body tense up as we walked out of Williams's office. Her fists were clenched, so tight her knuckles went white. The hallway felt like it stretched forever while we walked in silence past the trophy cases and bulletin boards. Christine stayed behind to talk to Williams about something else, but I knew she was just as disappointed. We pushed through the heavy front doors and the spring air hit us, but it didn't help the anger burning in my chest. Maddie kicked a rock across the parking lot, and it bounced off someone's car tire. She turned to me with this look that said everything without words. We both knew Williams wasn't going to do anything real to help us. That afternoon, we met up at Maddie's house because her parents were at work. She paced around her bedroom while I sat on her bed watching her get more and more worked up. She wanted to text Bryce right then and tell him to publish everything about what happened during the AP exam. I kept shaking my head because we needed to be smart about this. The network had worked so hard to protect everyone, and I didn't want us getting in trouble for blackmail or something worse. Maddie threw a pillow at the wall and said we were running out of time. She reminded me about Jane and how many more girls would suffer if we didn't act fast. We went back and forth for an hour with neither of us backing down. Finally, I suggested we meet Bryce halfway and have him write something general about bathroom policies without naming names. Maddie rolled her eyes but agreed it was better than nothing. We called Bryce and met him at the coffee shop near school the next morning. He brought his laptop and took notes while we gave him statistics about UTIS and period problems. We showed him anonymous quotes from girls in our network who wanted their stories heard. He typed fast and asked good questions about how widespread the problem was. We made sure he understood not to mention Mrs. Finch or our school specifically. He said he could make it about the whole district's policies instead. 3 days later, the article went live on the school newspaper website. Within an hour, the comments section exploded with people arguing about everything. Older women shared stories about bleeding through their clothes in the 70s and 80s. Some guys from the school complained that girls just wanted special treatment and extra breaks. The debate got so heated, the moderators had to start deleting the worst comments. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts from the network asking if this was good or bad for us. I honestly didn't know, but at least people were talking about it. That evening, I got an email forwarded from Bryce saying the PTA vice president wanted to talk to students. She'd read the article and wanted to understand what was really happening in classrooms. This felt like the break we needed because parents had way more power than students. We spent the next 2 days figuring out who would talk to parents and who needed to stay anonymous. Jane agreed to let Christine share her medical information but wouldn't show up in person. Amy said she'd tell her story if other girls came with her for support. Ellie was too scared about her grades to participate publicly. We scheduled the listening session for the following Tuesday evening in the library. 20 parents showed up, which was more than we expected. Amy's hands shook while she described her accident from last year. I held her hand under the table while she talked about the blood and the shame. Several moms gasped and one started crying when Amy explained how Mrs. Finch made her sit there. The parents took notes and asked questions about other teachers and their policies. We explained that most teachers were reasonable, but a few had extreme rules. The PTA vice president said she'd bring this to the next board meeting. The very next morning, Mrs. Finch sent out a new email about testing procedures. She said that due to recent disruptions, anyone who left their seat during any quiz or test would get an automatic 0. No exceptions for any reason, including medical emergencies. The email felt like a slap in the face after everything we'd been through. Girls in the network started panicking about upcoming tests and quizzes. Some were talking about dropping her class even though it would hurt their transcripts. That Thursday in class, this guy Brad stood up and said he was sick of hearing about periods. He said if guys had to hold it, then girls should too, because equality meant the same rules for everyone. Half the guys in class started nodding and agreeing with him. The girls all looked at each other with disbelief that this was even a debate. Mrs. Finch just stood there letting him rant about feminism going too far. The room felt like it was about to explode with everyone taking sides. I wanted to scream, but knew that would just make things worse for us. Friday's quiz turned into a nightmare when Jane's face went completely white halfway through. Jane's face going white during Friday's quiz seems awfully convenient timing, after Mrs. Finch just made her zero tolerance policy even stricter. I wonder if Jane's having a real medical emergency, or if this is her body's way of protesting the impossible situation she's been put in. She gripped her desk so hard I thought she might break it. Her whole body started shaking and I could see sweat on her forehead. Maddie saw it too and immediately started hyperventilating loud enough for everyone to hear. She fell out of her chair, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Mrs. Finch rushed over to Maddie while Jane tried to breathe through whatever wave of pain hit her. I grabbed the trash can and put it next to Jane just in case. Mrs. Finch marked both of them as disruptive in her gradebook right in front of everyone. She said they'd both lose points for causing a scene during the quiz. The injustice of it made my blood boil, but we had to stay focused on the bigger plan. That afternoon, Christine called me into her office with a stack of papers. She explained that everything we'd documented could support a Title IX complaint with the district. She said the bathroom policy created discriminatory conditions that denied equal access to education for female students. We spent 3 hours going through every statement and piece of medical documentation we'd collected. Christine helped us write the formal complaint using the right legal language. She made copies of everything and put it in a manila folder marked confidential. Monday morning, we submitted everything to the district office downtown. The secretary stamped it received and gave us a case number. Christine said someone named George Fletcher would be investigating our complaint. She warned us it could take weeks or even months to get a resolution, but at least it was official now, and the district had to respond somehow. 3 days later, George Fletcher called me during lunch period. His voice sounded tired but serious as he scheduled my interview for that Thursday after school. He asked me to bring any notes or dates I could remember about specific incidents. I wrote down everything I could think of during study hall, filling 3 pages with times Mrs. Finch denied bathroom requests. Jane's interview was right after mine, and she looked pale walking into the conference room. She carried a thick folder of medical records from her doctor about her endometriosis. George Fletcher spent 2 hours with her, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Amy went next, and I could hear her crying through the door as she talked about her accident. The interviews went on for 3 days with George Fletcher asking every girl detailed questions about what happened and when. He wanted exact dates and times and witnesses for everything. The school nurse came in on Friday with a stack of papers showing how many girls came to her office with UTIs. She had charts going back 2 years with names and dates and medical problems. She explained to George Fletcher how holding your bladder too long causes infections and kidney problems. She had 17 cases just from Mrs. Finch's classes this year alone. George Fletcher's eyes got wider as she showed him page after page of documentation. He made copies of everything and put them in a thick manila folder with our case number on it. Monday morning, Mrs. Finch walked into class with her face completely blank. She didn't look at any of us who had given statements to George Fletcher. She taught the whole lesson staring at the back wall over our heads. When I raised my hand to answer a question, she ignored me completely. She called on boys and girls who hadn't been part of the complaint but acted like we didn't exist. The silent treatment was weird but better than her usual mean comments. Tuesday, she handed back our homework with more red marks than I'd ever seen. She took off points for writing my name too small at the top of the page. She marked me down for using a comma where she wanted a semicolon. My usually perfect homework came back with a 73%. Jane's paper had even more red marks with a 68 at the top. Maddie got a 65 for using the wrong color pen, even though she'd never said anything about pen color before. I started keeping every single paper she handed back in a folder. I took pictures of each assignment with the crazy markings all over them. Wednesday's quiz was even worse with points off for things that made no sense. She marked my correct answer wrong because I didn't show enough work, even though I showed every step. Thursday, I went to the assistant principal's office with my folder of papers. I showed him my grades from the whole year compared to the last 2 weeks. He looked at each paper and frowned at the red marks everywhere. He said he would review my work and compare it to the grading standards. He made copies of everything and gave me a form to fill out for a formal grade appeal. Friday morning during announcements, Principal Williams talked about new health and safety rules. He said starting Monday, all teachers had to allow emergency bathroom passes during tests. He called it a wellness initiative to support student health, but we all knew what it really was. He didn't mention Mrs. Finch or our complaint, but the timing was too perfect to be random. Mrs. Finch's face turned red as she listened to the announcement. She gripped her coffee mug so hard I thought it might break. The local education blog posted an article that afternoon about bathroom policies in schools. They quoted Bryce's earlier article and said they were investigating our district specifically. The reporter called the school asking for comments, but the secretary said they couldn't discuss ongoing investigations. The blog post got shared hundreds of times on social media. Parents started commenting with their own stories about strict teachers and bathroom rules. George Fletcher called me again the next week to explain what would happen next. He said the investigation could take up to 3 months to finish. He explained that Mrs. Finch might have to do special training about student health needs. He said she could get a performance improvement plan, but probably wouldn't lose her job. He wanted us to understand that big changes take time in the school system. The stress of everything started breaking our group apart. Raven stopped sitting with us at lunch because she needed Mrs. Finch's recommendation letter for college. She said she couldn't risk her future even though she supported what we were doing. Maddie got angrier every day that nothing was happening fast enough. She wanted to organize a protest or call the news stations to put more pressure on the school. She kept saying we should have destroyed Mrs. Finch when we had the chance. The arguments between Maddie and Raven got worse each day. Jane tried to stay neutral, but the stress was making her endometriosis worse. I felt stuck in the middle trying to hold everyone together. My mom noticed I wasn't eating much at dinner anymore. She kept asking if something was wrong at the school or with my friends. My dad said I looked tired and asked if I was sleeping okay. I couldn't tell them about the investigation without them calling the school and making everything worse. I pushed food around my plate and said everything was fine. They exchanged worried looks but didn't push harder. The weight of keeping this secret from them made me feel even more alone. Bryce texted me Monday morning saying he'd filed a public records request for the evaluation video from the AP exam. He wanted to see if we could get proof of what happened that day with Mrs. Finch. The school district sent him a denial letter 2 days later saying personnel evaluations were private and couldn't be released to students. He showed me the letter at lunch while we sat in the corner of the cafeteria away from everyone else. His hands were shaking with frustration as he folded the paper and shoved it in his backpack. We both knew the video would have shown everything, but now we'd never get our hands on it. Bryce kept digging though and spent hours in the computer lab after school, searching through old school board meeting minutes. On Thursday, he found something better in an email thread that got accidentally posted with public meeting documents. 3 teachers had written to the principal about concerns with bathroom policies affecting student health during long testing blocks. The emails didn't name Mrs. Finch directly, but talked about students getting UTIs and having accidents. One teacher wrote that she'd seen girls crying in the hallway after being denied bathroom passes. Another mentioned that parents had been complaining for years without any changes being made. Bryce printed out copies for everyone in our group, and we passed them around during lunch. Maddie's eyes lit up when she read them because finally we had proof that other adults knew this was wrong. The next morning, Principal Williams called an assembly for all AP students about maintaining proper conduct during ongoing investigations. He stood at the podium gripping the microphone and talked about trusting the process and letting administrators handle any concerns. His eyes kept scanning the crowd and stopping on our group sitting together in the middle section. He said any students who tried to interfere with personnel decisions would face serious consequences, including suspension. The way he stressed the word consequences made my stomach drop because we all knew he was talking directly to us. After the assembly, Christine pulled me aside in the hallway and said the PTA meeting was happening that night. She'd arranged for Ellie and Amy to speak about their experiences if they felt comfortable doing it. Jane's mom would present her medical documentation since Jane was too scared to speak publicly herself. Christine squeezed my shoulder and told me this was our chance to make real change happen. The PTA meeting was packed with more parents than I'd ever seen at a school event before. They had to bring in extra chairs from the cafeteria, and people were still standing along the walls. Ellie went first, and her voice shook as she described stuffing paper towels in her underwear every day before Mrs. Finch's class. Mrs. Finch handing out those weird low grades right after the investigation started feels pretty calculated to me, like she's trying to punish the girls without saying anything directly. But the timing is way too obvious for this to be about comma placement. She talked about the fear of bleeding through and how she couldn't focus on math when she was counting minutes until class ended. Amy stood up next, and the whole room went silent as she described her accident junior year. She said the blood ran down her leg while she tried to finish her test because she knew Mrs. Finch would give her a 0 if she left. Her mom was crying in the front row as Amy explained how she'd had nightmares for months afterward. Christine read Jane's medical report from her doctor explaining that her endometriosis caused severe pain and heavy bleeding that couldn't be predicted or controlled. The report said Jane had been hospitalized twice, and that stress made her condition worse, which could affect her ability to attend college. Parents started whispering to each other, and I saw several moms wiping their eyes with tissues. Then Mrs. Finch stood up from her seat in the back row wearing her best suit like she'd prepared for this moment. She walked to the front with perfect posture and started talking about maintaining high academic standards. She said her bathroom policy had produced some of the highest AP test scores in the district for 20 years. She talked about teaching responsibility and preparing students for the real world where they couldn't just leave whenever they wanted. Some parents started nodding along, especially the ones who always complained about participation trophies and kids being too soft these days. The room split right down the middle with parents arguing about whether grades or health mattered more. One dad yelled that his daughter's college chances were more important than a few bathroom breaks. A mom shot back that her daughter's UTI had turned into a kidney infection from holding her bladder too long. The meeting turned into chaos with parents shouting over each other while the PTA president banged her gavel trying to restore order. 3 days later, the district sent out an email announcing a new draft policy for all teachers. Starting next month, every classroom would have emergency bathroom passes using a simple hand signal system. Students could hold up 2 fingers to request an emergency pass, and teachers had to allow them to leave without questions. The email said this would minimize disruption while protecting student health and dignity. Maddie forwarded it to our whole group with a bunch of celebration emojis because it was exactly what we'd been asking for all along. The next week, Principal Williams made another announcement during morning homeroom. He said the department head position had been filled by Mr. Peterson from the science department, who was known for his collaborative teaching style. He thanked all the candidates for their interest and said the decision was based on finding the best fit for the school's future direction. I watched Mrs. Finch's face turn white as she gripped her coffee mug and stared straight ahead at the wall. Her dream of running the department was dead, and everyone knew why, even if nobody would say it out loud. 2 days later, Mrs. Finch got called to the principal's office during her planning period. The substitute who covered her next class told us she'd be out for special training over the next few weeks. George Fletcher later explained to me that she'd been put on a performance improvement plan. She had to attend monthly workshops about adolescent health needs and would have administrators observing her classes every month. She kept her job but lost all the respect and freedom she'd built over 20 years of teaching. The email came that Friday afternoon while I was doing homework at my desk. Mrs. Finch had withdrawn her recommendation letter for my college applications. She wrote that she couldn't in good conscience recommend a student who had undermined classroom authority and participated in targeted harassment. The words stung, even though I'd been expecting some kind of revenge from her. My hands shook as I forwarded the email to Christine asking what I should do now since application deadlines were coming up fast. Christine called me within 5 minutes and said she'd already talked to Ms. Ashley, who taught AP Literature. Miss Ashley agreed to write me a new recommendation letter focusing on my advocacy skills and moral courage in standing up for others. It wouldn't be as strong academically since I'd never taken her class, but it would tell a better story about who I was as a person. Christine said sometimes the best recommendations aren't about grades, but about character, and colleges needed students who would fight for what's right. 2 weeks later, Jane's phone buzzed during lunch with an email from Princeton's scholarship committee. Her hands shook as she opened it, and her face went white, then red, then she started crying. She showed us the screen where they'd written about accepting her documented medical situation and the new school policies as proof of extraordinary circumstances. The scholarship was still hers, and she typed crying emojis and hearts into our group chat while we all hugged her right there in the cafeteria. That same afternoon, Principal Williams called Maddie and me to his office where the school board president sat with a folder full of papers. They'd approved our proposal for a student-led menstrual equity committee with an actual budget for emergency supplies and policy input on health issues. What started as girls sneaking pads to each other in secret was becoming official school policy with real money behind it. The board president handed us the paperwork to sign as founding members and said the committee would start next year with a dedicated supply closet and monthly meetings. After the meeting, Maddie and I sat in her car in the parking lot, finally being honest about everything. She gripped the steering wheel and admitted she'd wanted to see Mrs. Finch completely destroyed after what happened to Amy. I told her I'd had the same dark thoughts about exposing her and watching her career burn to the ground. We'd both settled for systemic change instead of revenge, but neither of us felt totally satisfied with how things turned out. Maddie started the engine and said maybe getting actual policy changes was better than ruining one person's life, even if it didn't feel as good. 3 days later, Christine called me to her office and handed me a paper bag that felt soft and familiar. Inside was my black cardigan washed and folded perfectly with no note or message attached. Christine said Mrs. Finch had dropped it off that morning without saying a word, just leaving it on the desk and walking out. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement we'd ever get from her about what happened that day. The following Starting Monday, yellow cards appeared on every teacher's desk in every classroom across the school. Students could silently place them on their desks before leaving for the bathroom without asking permission or explaining anything. I watched our math teacher pick one up and examine it like it was some strange artifact from another world. The English teacher next door kept glancing at hers nervously like it might bite her. Watching all these teachers adjust to losing their bathroom control brought deep satisfaction after years of begging for basic dignity. During study hall, I started thinking about everything that had happened since that AP exam 6 weeks ago. We didn't ruin Mrs. Finch's life like we'd planned that day in the bathroom when we had her right where we wanted her. Instead, we'd redirected her power and made real, lasting change that would help students for years to come. The cost had been our grades from her harsh grading and the stress of fighting the system and some friendships that couldn't handle the pressure. But the benefit would outlast all of us long after we graduated and moved on with our lives. At the end of year assembly, Jane found each of us in the crowd and hugged us tight with her Princeton acceptance letter tucked safely in her bag. The network's emergency supplies were still hidden in that hollowed-out textbook, but rarely needed now that students had official passes. We'd protected her when she needed it most, and changed things for every girl who would come after us. Standing there in the gym, watching everyone celebrate the end of the school year, I realized something important. 6 weeks after that AP exam, we were all actually better off than where we'd started, even if it wasn't how we'd imagined. Mrs. Finch had learned some humility after 20 years of total control, though she'd never admit it out loud. We'd learned how to work the system using official channels and adult allies instead of just secret networks. Future students wouldn't suffer through the same humiliation and medical problems we'd endured for years. Nobody got exactly what they wanted in the beginning, but everyone got something they actually needed in the end. Mrs. Finch kept her job but lost her power and respect, while we lost our revenge fantasy but gained real institutional change. Maybe that's what real justice looks like when you're dealing with systems instead of individuals. Not the satisfying destruction of your enemy, but the slow, grinding work of making things better for the people who come next. Well, folks, that's where we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for sticking around while I questioned everything along the way. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.